it very much. Got it. Okay. So yeah, over at Minnesota Now, we've been working on putting together a flyer just with some talking points on it about how to talk about abortion in our communities because it can be a heavy topic to discuss. So we want to be able to give people a strategy going into these conversations that they might be having with their friends, family, or community. And I sent the flyer up to Sue beforehand, so I don't know if you all had a chance to look at it or not. I can attempt to share it again in the chat. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, though. Okay, it might have worked right there. Yeah, so I do have like a PowerPoint slide that I'm going to share on my screen, so I'm not going to be able to show you the flyer as I'm talking, but it's there in the chat for you to access, hopefully, if you'd like. All right, so I'm going to.
Did folks get the flyer? And are they able to open the flyer here? Grace, can you just email it to me? Do you have it right there that you can email it to me?
Yeah.
Then I'll email it to everybody who's here so that they can. Because it didn't open for me. Did anyone else? Was anyone else able to open it? No.
Okay.
Right.
That's what I was kind of worried about because it's a private document. I don't know how to convert it into anything else.
I was able to open it.
So was I.
Awesome. I'm just gonna give you guys a few minutes to take a look at it if you like. While I get myself organized here.
I sound again. What happened now? Shoot.
If you did not get the flyer, put that in chat and I will email it to you.
Are we all good?
There we go. Sound again. What the heck is going on?
Lanny needs it. I'll send it over, Lanny. Are we waiting to make sure everybody has it?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
don't need to, like, everyone doesn't need to read through all of it. I'm about to like basically summarize everything that's in it too. So it's just so that you have it, so you don't know what I'm talking about.
I thought we lost the sound again. That's what's going.
No, we were just being quiet for the moment, letting people read.
Okay. Whatever.
Hmm.
Okay.
Okay. I think I'm going to get started just in the interest of time. But I think Renee is going to keep working on sending that out. And as I said, I'm going to tell you everything that's on it anyway, but it's just to have on the side in case you want to know the physical thing that I'm talking about and referencing. Okay, so we're gonna present this. Yeah, so as I mentioned, well, my name is Grace. I'm here from the Minnesota NOW organization. NOW stands for National Organization for Women. We've been working on this flyer to provide people strategies and talking points in their conversations about abortion that they might be having with their community members or family members or friends. So just a little bit about the organization that I'm coming from, first of all. Minnesota NOW is a state chapter of the National NOW organization. It started in 1971, and since then it's talked about like wage and workplace inequities, women's health and safety, and constitutional equality. And NOW is defined by being a multi-issue platform. And by being so, we recognize that the inequality that women face is intersectional. It includes women of color, LGBTQ people, lower income women, and a whole variety of other people who might experience inequality in different ways. So our current issues that we focus on right now are constitutional equality, economic justice, freedom from violence, LGBTQ rights, racial justice, and reproductive rights. And I'm coming to you from the Reproductive Rights Committee to talk to you today about talking about abortion. So before we can talk about how to talk about abortion, it's good to know a little bit about the state of abortion in Minnesota and where we live. So I've got a little summary for you right here. Roe v. Wade, we all already know, it was ruled on in 1973, and it gave national protection to the right to abortion for women and pregnant people. In 1995, the Minnesota State Supreme Court actually established the right to abortion in the Minnesota Constitution. So it established that right within our constitutional right to privacy. And it said more specifically that the state cannot favor one pregnancy outcome over another. So fast forward to June 2022, this past summer, the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, and all of a sudden the state of abortion in each individual state becomes a lot more important. So a lot of people who didn't know about Doe v. Gomez before has now heard of it. In July of 2022, in Doe v. Minnesota, our Minnesota Supreme Court, or no, it was a district court judge that actually overturned a lot of abortion restrictions that we had going on in the state. And there are a ton of them, but a few of them might include the requirement that a young person has to notify both parents before getting an abortion, or the requirement that only physicians can supply abortions or medication abortions, which meant that perfectly qualified clinicians couldn't do so. And then there's stuff like the mandatory delay requirement that forced patients to wait 24 hours after their consult before actually doing the procedure. So stuff like that, this ruling overturned. And Minnesota is actually unique in our region in the Midwest in that we have this constitutional protection for abortion in our state constitution, and protection for providers and for those seeking abortion. On the next slide, I've kind of got a map from the Guttmacher Institute. And this is updated as of November 23rd of this past year. So some things might have changed since then. But you can see that Minnesota is surrounded by states that are a lot more restrictive than we are when it comes to providing abortion services. So for example, in North Dakota, there's an abortion trigger ban that's currently being debated in court. And they have a lot of restrictions in place that restrict access to abortion, many similar to those that we had that were recently overturned. In South Dakota, abortion is banned except to preserve the life of the mother. And even so, patients have to make 2 trips in order to get the procedure. They have to do the consult, and then 72 hours later, they have to come back for the actual procedure. In Iowa, the Supreme Court actually overturned the right to abortion. So that's no longer protected under the Constitution. And there's a 6-week ban being debated in the court. And in Wisconsin, there's a lot of legal uncertainty about the future of abortion access in the state, because I believe the state actually has a ban in place that isn't necessarily being enforced, but the legislature there is very Republican and are trying to make that happen. So Minnesota is going to bear more and more responsibility for delivering abortion care to those who need it in our region. There's going to be a lot of women who need access to this care coming to our state. The Guttmacher Institute estimated that we could see a 371% increase in the number of patients seeking abortion. And the scary thing is that we don't necessarily have the infrastructure to support this need. On the previous slide, it mentions that we only have 8 physical clinics in the state in order to provide abortion care, and those are designated on this map right here. So we have responsibility to not only support these clinics and give them funding and the resources that they need to meet this demand, but there's also always the risk that our constitutional abortion protection can be overturned. Just as Roe v. Wade was overturned, our Doe v. Gomez can be as well. So with that in mind, that's why it's important to talk about abortion. But the question is, how do we do that? Abortion is a very difficult, heavy thing to talk about, especially with friends and family in your community. It awakens deep emotions and opinions, no matter what your stance is. But that doesn't mean that we shove it aside. It means that it's even more important that we talk about it, because it reflects people's lives and it reflects our values as a society. So we should talk about it. So because of that, so now we've made this flyer to try to help people have these conversations. So we have this basic structure for a statement you might make about abortion, and this is a statement based on values. While facts are awesome and they should be taken more seriously, the unfortunate reality is that sometimes they are not. First of all, they are hard to remember and memorize for the person speaking, but at the same time, factual statements don't hit at the emotional center that people usually come from when it comes to abortion. So these I believe statements that we've created, they state your values. They talk about where you're coming from as a person, and so it's easier to make an argument in that way, and it's harder to argue against that argument when you're saying, well, I believe that this is true because this happened to me, or because I had this experience. It's what you believe. Someone can't say that you don't believe that. So our basic structure that we come up with is kind of mapped out on the slide here. The first sentence will be your value. So I believe that without full reproductive health care, pregnancy endangers women's lives and well-being, for example. The next statement will identify who is working against that value and how. So government interventions, such as bans on abortion, is interrupting the ability of women to access life-saving health care. So in this case, government intervention is what's working against your value. Next is the action that should happen. We need to assert our right to have autonomy over our lives. And the final thing is going to be what you hope to see in the future. So, for example, all people deserve quality healthcare that meets their unique needs. And the hope is that everyone will be able to take this value statement structure and form their own statements based on their own experiences, beliefs, and opinions. But of course, we know that can be hard to come up with something like that. So we suggested about 6 different I believe statements that people can use in their everyday conversations about abortion. And in the following slides, I'd like to go over those. And the goal is that everyone will be able to use this themselves. So I want everyone to be able to understand them and where they're coming from. So at the end of each of these slides, I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat or to voice them out loud. I think I might be able to see the chat from here. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just going to go through each slide, and if anyone has any questions as I go, feel free to drop them in the chat. So the first statement on the flyer that we're talking about is this. So I believe that without full reproductive health care, pregnancy endangers women's lives and well-being. So this statement comes from the fact that in states where abortion has been banned, providers deny pregnant people appropriate care for miscarriages and ectopic pregnancy due to fear of legal consequences. So for example, in Texas, there are laws that ban abortion, only make for a very narrow exception, only to save the life of a pregnant patient or to prevent substantial impairment of major bodily function. That's a quote from the legislation. So the people who get the abortions don't face legal consequences, but the providers who provide the abortions could be sentenced to life in prison or fined up to $100,000. So the consequences are high, and of course the providers, for fear of this, don't provide treatment for things like a miscarriage, because the procedure involved is extremely similar to abortion. It could be misconstrued as an abortion by, say, a lawmaker who doesn't understand the intricacies of medical practice. And these delays in care during the first trimester can have extremely serious consequences like bleeding, hemorrhaging, septic miscarriages, and ectopic pregnancies. Providers are so fearful of the legal consequences that they might wait until the woman's life truly is in danger before providing them with this care. So a good example of this, a pretty famous one, is Amanda in Texas. The New York Times did a story on her. Amanda and her husband were trying to have a baby, the first time she tried, she had a miscarriage. This was before the ban. She was treated. She went home. She was fine. So they tried again, and she again had a miscarriage. And this time the abortion ban was in place. Instead of getting the treatment she needed, she was sent home with instructions to return only if she was bleeding so excessively that her blood filled a diaper more than once an hour. And hospital records that she shared showed that her embryo had no cardiac activity during the hospital visit. And on an ultrasound a week later, it also had, a week earlier, sorry, the embryo also had no cardiac activity. So she went home and she bled heavily for 48 hours, and the experience was extremely traumatic and scary for her. And we've seen reports similar to this from places like Ohio, Wisconsin, and other places where abortion bans are in place. So that is where this statement is coming from, is without access to care for things like miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies and other complications, not just for actual abortions, but for anything that could come up in a pregnancy. Without access to that care, then pregnancy becomes dangerous for women. So does anyone have any questions about this value statement? Actually can't access the chat, so if Renee, you could possibly let me know if anything pops up.
Thank you. I think it is really
I don't see
helpful
anything in
to-
chat.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
It is really helpful to be able to speak about issues that could cross over the lines into people who might feel that they normally would not support abortion rights, but if they can see themselves or people they love in some of these circumstances, it does help to broaden the support for not having these restrictions in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these bans don't only affect people who are seeking abortion. Like you said, they affect so many more people than that. Like any woman who's trying to get pregnant. So yes, absolutely, the consequences are severe. Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to say or ask? We'll move on to the next statement then. So the statement says that I believe that people deserve to be trusted to work with their medical providers without the government invading their personal lives. So this is based on the idea that abortion is a personal decision based on each pregnant person's unique circumstances. The law is very general and it cannot account for the unique circumstances or complications that might come up in a pregnant person's life. So maybe a woman gets a diagnosis of a serious complication and has to end her pregnancy for her own safety. Maybe the family learns that they have a very serious fetal diagnosis, or the baby is dying and is not going to be able to be carried to term. Who knows? Maybe the family has financial hardship and they can't support a child at the moment. Who knows what the issue is? But people should be trusted to know what is going to be best for themselves and for their family in this situation, because the government cannot possibly account for everything that might come up. And this statement is also meant to point out the falseness behind the anti-abortion state choice slogan. You might hear a lot, leave the choice to the states, and this is meant to argue that the federal government should be kept out of medical decisions that should be left only to the woman, her doctor, and local leaders. And this puts up this facade that the anti-abortion movement is for choice, when actually it doesn't really matter to the woman which branch of government is in charge of putting restrictions on abortion, because either way, she doesn't get to make the decision for herself. She doesn't get the say that she deserves. So that's why. So in essence, women should be allowed to make these decisions for themselves, is what this value statement is based on. Does anyone have any questions about this one?
To me, this is also similar just to the argument that we should be able to make our own medical decisions, no matter what the medical decision is,
Mhm.
with our doctors, without government interference. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, medical decisions are very a personal, private matter, that the government just shouldn't have a say in. How can they possibly know what's going on in your life, right? So, yeah, that is what the statement is based on. Okay, moving on to the next one. So this one states, I believe that forced pregnancy takes away a family's freedom to choose. Without full access to reproductive health care, women may be forced into the dangers of childbirth. So this statement is based on two main ideas. So first, the risk of death due to childbirth is actually 14 times higher than the risk due to abortion. And that is based on a statistic from the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. 80% of abortions in the US actually occur within the first trimester, when abortion is the safest, and serious complications from abortions are rare at all gestational stages. So in reality, childbirth is much more dangerous than abortion. And a ban on abortion would force women who don't want to undertake those risks. And in addition, going back to Amanda's story from a couple of slides ago, because of her experience with her miscarriage in Texas under the abortion ban, she no longer feels safe trying to conceive because she fears that something similar will happen again. So in this way, a couple who is actually looking to give birth to a child is taken away the choice to do so. So it kind of works both ways. Women who can't get an abortion don't have the option to do so, and even women who are looking to conceive but might have health complications can't have a child. And so that is what this value statement is based on. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this one?
Chris put in the chat that she said it's not just women, but young girls. Do you want to talk about the risk to young girls?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I don't know. I can't tell you like the medical or like statistical rate of danger to young girls who are forced to undergo abortions, or who are forced to undergo childbirth when they don't want to. But for young girls, there's the aspect of the rest of their lives when they're forced to give birth to a child. Not only is there the physical danger, but of course, the consequences for what their future might look like might be a bit more serious. Perhaps they're in school and they have to drop out to take care of the child or to provide for the child. Perhaps they have to get a job and give up going to college, whatever the situation might be. But there again is the removal of choice in a situation.
I know that young girls and young teens especially who go through pregnancy, full-term pregnancy, risk the dangers of damaging their reproductive systems. Their bodies just aren't ready to go through pregnancy yet. So Chris, do you have any statistics on that or any knowledge on that?
No specific statistics, but part of it was even looking, my sister did several trips to Addis Ababa, and they had issues with young girls being forced into marriage and giving birth and ending up having fistulas and just all of the things that happen when a young body is not ready to carry a pregnancy to full term, and lots of when you talk about the dangers of childbirth, those dangers are increased significantly when the person giving birth is younger and their body's not fully developed. So I'm afraid I don't have that, but when we're talking about these value statements, I think it's very powerful if you say women and even young girls, because, you know, again, we're trying to find universal language that, you know, that even, you know, very conservative people can understand the values and get behind. And when you start talking about girls being forced into the danger of childbirth, I think it's more powerful than just saying women. And I'm not arguing that women are also in danger, but as we're looking at making these statements, as a marketing tool to help more people understand and support our position, I just think it is stronger to point out, you know, that this is happening to even very young girls.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I actually wrote that down. We're looking at ways to like improve these talking points as well. So that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's especially strong when we're talking about, you know, the anti-abortion movement is always saying, we need to protect the lives of children. Well, what are young girls who are giving birth to babies? They're children giving birth to children. So we should be protecting them as well. Thank you, Chris. Okay, and moving on to the next statement. So this one states, I believe that without full access to reproductive health care, women are deprived of full, dignified lives. So this statement is based on kind of the push to reclaim the term life. Over time, like, you know, the term life has a lot of emotional strength and momentum. It's hard to argue against saving and supporting life, because who doesn't want to do that? And if you don't do that, you're for murder, right? And the anti-abortion side has kind of adopted this term as their own, and turned the debate into a pro-life versus pro-choice conversation. And you'll notice that throughout this presentation, I haven't used the term, I've very much tried to avoid using the term pro-life, because using it just like reinforces it. When we want to change that, we want to show that using that abortion in fact encourages life. It saves lives literally, for women whose pregnancies are endangering their lives. And it also gives women back their lives. It gives them the agency to decide what they want their life to look like. And one country that has had a lot of success with this is Argentina. As Renee mentioned, I've done a little bit of research on anti-abortion, on abortion rhetoric in Argentina, and they've used the term dignified life. So abortion gives women back their dignified life, as in the idea that women are full living human beings with needs, desires, and rights, and not just obligation toward others. Using this as one of their strategies, Argentina was able to pass like abortion legalization legislation, and they're like a country among, it must be like 3 to 5, I can't remember the exact number, but there are very few countries in Latin America who have legalized abortion. Argentina has become one of them, using this strategy among others. So yes, that is what this value system is based off. It is reclaiming the term life and showing people that abortion does mean life. Does anyone have any questions about the statement? Any comments or questions or thoughts?
I'm curious what people think of that statement, if it would resonate with conservatives in Wright County. Nobody has a thought about it.
I think Renee, that you've probably already seen too, but especially in this part of the county, and maybe it's in all the parts of counties, but there's these very, what I would say is like ultra conservative, off the main path, if you will, churches. You know, they don't even send their kids to like public school. They're all homeschooled and things like that. And it's really big out here. And it's really, it's very sad in a way, because the kids are never prepared to go to college, because, you know, you're homeschooled. It's just not in their, it's just not in their future. And so if anything, if a child should become pregnant, I just, you know, they would be forced to have that child strictly because of the, you know, the faith community that they belong to. It's so strong.
And Lori, you're making me think of the fact that or the message I've heard a lot is that when we're talking persuasion, we can't talk to the people who are at the extremes, because they're never going to hear us.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I guess my question was even kind of off balance, because I was saying, would conservatives listen to us, or strong conservatives? And they probably won't. So would middle of the road folks listen to us? And I guess what you could say is, you know, I believe that women deserve full lives. If you don't think they deserve full lives, that's your choice. You know,
Yeah.
other
absolutely.
thoughts? I mean, I think it's important for us to kind of process through these reactions we have in our heads and the resistance we might have to using them, because I think it's really easy to say, no one's going to listen to me say that. But if we don't say anything, nobody's saying anything. So how do we move past that first reaction? That's what I'm kind of getting at.
Mhm.
And don't you think, Renee, that women are vilified? I mean, there's, if a young woman gets pregnant, she's so vilified that she's not even sort of treated as human. It's kind of, she's treated like she should be, you know, in some seriously reprimanded. I mean, this is her fault, and it's like a burden you have to bear the rest of your life, and they don't even think about that this is a life. I mean, these are two lives, and this is how you're wanting these two to start out in their young lives. A mother who, you know, for a ton of reasons, just is regretting having this baby and then being forced to do so. It's just such a terrible start for a child's life.
Mm-hmm. You know, Lori, I talked to Grace a lot about how I hate the term pro-life, because everybody's pro-life,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like we all believe in life, except for those few people out there who are mentally ill and you know, or sociopaths or whatever. Everybody in the public believes in life. So like Grace, I don't believe in using that term. And so I said to Grace, I'm going to start calling them the pro-punishers, or the pro-punishment people, because that's what it's really about, is punishing women for supposed mistakes, which oftentimes aren't even mistakes, because 80% of people who seek abortions were using contraception. So most of the time, it's not even about a mistake, and yet we're compelled to say, well, the mistake was they shouldn't have had sex, right? Which is a normal human activity. So it's like this vilification is totally right, and this pro-punishment of, you know, women.
Mhm. It's that vilification of like female pleasure. Like men, it's okay for men to have sex and enjoy themselves, but for women, like they have to take the responsibility and be safe, be smart, and when things go unplanned, it becomes the woman's fault.
Yep. Then they have to deal with the consequences of their actions, right?
Yeah.
That's what's said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really liked, Laura, I really liked your point also about how forcing like a woman to have a child that perhaps she might regret having isn't a good start for either her or the child. Like I like that point because it goes completely against the anti-abortion argument. Like it's in the best interest of the child to support life and banning abortion and making sure that they can be born, and supporting their rights, right? Their right to life. But it doesn't go against the interest of a child to be born into a family where they're not wanted. So I really like that point that you made.
So it's sort of like not just life it's not about being born is one thing, being born into a quality life is another thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Renee, in response to your question about statistics, I did just find a couple different fact sheets on maternal mortality. One talks about the risks of older women go way up, and then another one mentions that pregnancy as the leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. So I forwarded you the fact sheets on those.
Thank you. The leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds. And that's pretty shocking. And then think if it's a 10 or 11 or 12 or 13-year-old, it's even worse.
Would think, yeah.
Yeah. And you know that throughout history, pregnancy was a leading cause of death for all women until we became better medically at dealing with pregnancy. So it's it's not, I think people think of it as a normalized human condition. Pregnancy is just normal, but it actually has always been highly risky for women. It's always caused high levels of death in women.
Yeah. Okay. If anyone doesn't have any other comments on this statement,
I'm trying to find it, but I have a list somewhere of it's about 20 or 30 different reasons why pregnancy should be terminated. And it's really interesting, all the different reasons. And I wish I could find it now. I don't know where it is, but it's a really good conversation piece to have with people, why a pregnancy may not be, something that should go to full term, or it's all the different reasons. And it's really good. But I wish I knew where it was. I have it somewhere, but it's very interesting.
Well, send it over when you find it, Darlene.
Yeah, I'll have to look for it among all my other stuff. I keep finding it, and then I go where I'm gonna be able to find it, and then of course it's like when I want it, it's the way it goes. But yeah, I'll find it, but it is very, very good.
sounds like it'd be great. It would go well with the statement about how pregnancy should be a personal decision. There's so many different things that could happen.
I'm in the process of looking.
Sounds great. Okay. So this is our second to last statement, I believe, that we have. I believe that without full access to reproductive health care, pregnant people are at higher risk of violence. So this statement came out of a webinar that I attended and Renee brought to my attention about the relationship between reproductive health care and violence against women. That includes like intimate partner violence, sexual assault, femicide, the whole array of different things. So one of the presenters at this webinar was a assistant professor at Tulane University. She did a study. Her name was Mae Wallace. She did a study on pregnancy-related deaths between 2017 and 2019. And pregnancy-related deaths include the death of any person during a pregnancy or 1 year postpartum that are due to some relation to the pregnancy. And the study found that homicide exceeds any other single obstetric cause of death, so any other medical reason. And women who are pregnant or within 1 year postpartum are more likely to be killed than those who are not. So all of the experts on this webinar agreed that pregnancy is one of the most dangerous times in the life of someone who is experiencing intimate partner violence, and access to reproductive health care, including abortion, is absolutely essential to helping them out of those types of situations and helping them heal. First of all, controlling reproductive life, like access to abortion or contraception or anything like that, is an aspect of violence. Perpetrators of violence might control women's access to reproductive care as part of their violence against them or part of their way of controlling them. And by banning abortion, of course, that makes it much more easier for the perpetrator to achieve this goal. And on the flip side, once a survivor has escaped their situation, a large part of healing is about restoring their power and agency, which includes making one's own reproductive choices. And that includes taking the option of abortion if they want it. So by banning abortion, governments take away this option from survivors. And lastly, there is also the fact that those who are denied abortions are more likely to stay with an abusive partner. This might be perhaps because they don't have the economic means to support themselves or their child without the partner. So since they can't get an abortion, they have to give birth to the child, and they have to stay with the partner in order to support the child. And that's just like one scenario that might arise. But the statistics show that those who are denied abortions are more likely to stay in an abusive situation. So that is what this value statement is based on. Does anyone have any questions or comments about this one?
This makes me think of the community you were talking about, Lori, who are homeschooled and in real controlled situations, and how even more dangerous it is for them.
Yeah, it's I had and they're the nicest neighbors you could ever want. But I asked actually the oldest girl but she's just 17, and of course, they didn't go to school, so they were homeschooled. So I asked her, well, now what are you going to do with your future? And her mother, who's also a very, very, very nice woman, said, she looked at me just kind of aghast, and she said, well, she's going to do what God wants us to do, get married and have babies. It was like the decisions have all been made.
Mm-hmm.
This is really, yeah. And I think it's true in many cases when women end up in situations where they are pregnant, and there's too many competing voices for her to actually find the right path for her. Everybody wants to solve the thing, not necessarily based on the woman's best interests, but what's right for society. You don't want to be the scorned woman, so you should, either marry this person that you don't like or worse, and risk your body and give up your future. Is so just because that society will think better of you.
Yeah, so powerful, Larry. Thanks.
Yeah. Imagine someone who is like stuck in an abusive situation in that context would have an even harder time like breaking free of all those expectations and opinions and stuff like that. So thank you. It's important to think about. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last statement. This one, it says, I believe that the government violating a person's privacy regarding one medical choice puts other medical choices at risk. So this is just based on the idea that restricting someone's medical choice in one area creates precedent for doing so in other areas. And this statement is based on like a consensus in the political science field that policy in one area kind of leads to similar policy down the line. And an example of this could come from the Roe v. Wade ruling just this past summer. So Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in his concurring opinion that in future cases, we should reconsider all of this court's substantive due process precedents, including Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. So I want to point out particularly Griswold, which is a ruling from 1965 that basically says that the government can't restrict whether or not married couples can use contraception. And just in this sentence, Justice Thomas is suggesting that perhaps they should revisit that ruling, and who knows what they would do. Perhaps they would overturn that as well. We don't know, but the ruling of Roe has led to this new possibility in the future. So the statement is based on the fact that if we don't stop this now, it could lead to a domino effect that might affect other freedoms down the line. Does anyone have any questions about this one? Right. Yeah.
I find it incredibly ironic that the group that wants to end abortion also wants to end contraception. You know, it just is incredibly ironic.
Yeah. You'd think that one would be the answer to the other like supposed problem, but no. Yeah. So I was gonna have us like do breakout rooms and practice, but I think we're running out of time here. So I'm just gonna move on to the final slide. So obviously if you're having these conversations, like you're not just gonna be saying these value statements to like open air, like they're gonna respond and say stuff back to you. And the talking point sheet does provide some ideas for refuting things some people might say, but of course we can't cover all of that. So most of this advice is from Planned Parenthood. They say that you should always listen with compassion and learn and lean into values that you might have in common with the other person. Perhaps you might not agree on abortion policy, but I'm sure you both value life. You just disagree on what the best way is to protect life, but you could lean into that value of life and perhaps find somewhere you can connect. And of course, the goal isn't necessarily to change their opinion, because it's very hard to do that in one conversation, but to at least encourage understanding about the experiences that people who have had abortions. So perhaps they might not change their view on what the policy should be, but at least they can, feel an emotional connection to the people who might be affected by these policies. Using I statements is always a good tip for conversations like these, because it allows you to express yourself from your own experience and connect them to your own story. So there's that emotional connection, and then it's also hard to argue with someone who's speaking from their own personal experience or beliefs. Whereas if you state a fact, someone could just come back at you with another fact or like their own experiences, right? So I statements are always a good way to go. Oh, so sorry. All right. And another suggestion is to use gender inclusive language if you're so inclined. So for example, using pregnant person or people instead of women. It's just based on the idea that an acknowledgement that not just women are affected by abortion policies, LGBTQ folks are as well. So by using gender inclusive language, we can acknowledge that. And of course, it always helps to get more informed about abortion in general, and ACOG is a great resource for that. Okay, so thank you so much for having me, everyone. I enjoyed being here and discussing this with you. Does anyone have any final questions or comments or anything they wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
I'm just curious, Grace. 100 years ago, I mean, it seems that long, but when I was in college, and it was like in the mid 70s, and it was a very progressive college, small college, but there was sort of an underground pipeline, if you will, to New York, through a very, very wonderful man who ran the part of the student union and helped women get to New York. And I kind of got involved in that. And one of the questions that I had was, in today's world, which is, well, I'm 70, so that was, this was a long time ago. If a woman wanted to seek an abortion, what steps would she take? Where would she go in the state of Minnesota?
That's a great question, and I'm not well rehearsed in how that would look. I do know, as I mentioned, that there are 8 different physical clinics that provide abortion. Some of them actually, like Planned Parenthood, it actually has some restrictions on access to abortion. Those restrictions are the ones that were overturned in the recent ruling. So a woman could visit one of those clinics. Or there's also Just the Pill, which is an organization that provides mail-in abortion by taking a pill that would it makes the uterus contract.
Yeah,
And also prevents the
yeah.
what's called the layer in your uterus from setting, so it expels the fetus. So there are those 2 options in Minnesota. I'm sorry, I can't tell you the exact steps that they would have to take in order to
Sure.
get the access, but I do know that those are the options out there. Yeah.
And if I can interject, I was just on the way to Minneapolis this weekend listening to NPR, and I put in the link, a link to a Radio Lab podcast on abortion. And
Just listen to that, yeah.
did you listen to it? It's
Yeah.
really good, isn't it?
It
I mean,
is.
there is some amazing changes that are happening in abortion right now. And because the science is changing very, very fast. And it actually has been just since COVID, because when COVID hit, the ability for women to access clinics was less. And this opened up the ability for for people to do self-care abortions, which has only just sort of exploded in the last 5 years. And they talk about Just the Pill is one organization, but there's other organizations where they'll mail you the pills that allow for you to do a abortion at home. And they have no difference there's no more risk for a woman in self-managing her abortion. They have the exact same results as if a woman goes to a clinic. So I think in the next 5-10 years, we're going to really see a major shift in how abortion is done. And most of it's going to shift to being done at home for the first trimester.
Yep.
And then late-term abortions, which are often done because of problems with the fetus not being viable, things like that. Not always, but later term abortions would still be managed elsewhere. But this first trimester abortions are going to become much simpler to get. So Alicia has also done a lot of work around abortion. Do you know where people would go, what their best first step would be if they needed to access abortion?
Yeah, and as Grace said, Just the Pill will actually take you to look to see different places local to you in that sense. So both for to receive medication by mail, but also your local clinics, because certainly it needs to be verified, not just to state when was your last period or things like that. If there's a question of that, certainly that's usually the thing is, what was the last date of your period? So if you don't know, or I mean, a lot of people don't know that or track that by any means, is to know, well, when was the last day of my, period, and to know those exact numbers. But so with that is that there may be, and there would be a referral there for a clinic or something for you to go to for that, to see where you are in that.
So you mean if they went to Just the Pill and they filled out the form, they weren't eligible for a pill because they couldn't remember their dates? Yeah.
Yes, I believe, yes, on Just the Pill it will. There's, Planned Parenthood, certainly. Their clinics would tell you where to go or things of that nature. There's NAF, the National Abortion Federation. And I'm trying to think, what did NARAL has changed their name, the National Abortion and Reproductive League. They changed their name in Minnesota and nationally. And any of that, or if you go to NARAL, is that will certainly direct you to your local clinics, things of that nature. But, in terms of for self-managed abortion, that's something that, yeah, with the internet or things, we wouldn't have that before. You would still meet on video with a clinician, something of that nature. And the most important thing is that people do have access to those clinics, because with a number of the different bills that are being passed or things that are being looked at of the crisis pregnancy centers, which I think someone mentioned perhaps at the beginning during kind of that half hour, the social half hour, is certainly in terms of is that you do not need to be a medical clinic to have a ultrasound machine. And in terms of giving false statements or anything to kind of deter and push out, unfortunately, how many weeks are you pregnant? And that can affect what type of things may you have access to in terms of for pill medication, or if it would need to be a surgical procedure. Yeah.
It looks like NARAL changed their name to prochoiceamerica.org. I found their website, so I put them in the link.
Mm-hmm. Thankfully for me, when I just put my phone in and typed in abortion, I try to not let Google follow me, is it pulled up a lot of great sites and things. Certainly that's something where, my boyfriend in college is that in Buffalo, New York, they went to a small religious Catholic high school, and he and his girlfriend were pregnant and went to one of the crisis pregnancy centers. And that did push that out, and that she wasn't able to have access to an abortion, which is what they wanted. Is that certainly is that his ex-girlfriend, they have a wonderful family, not him, is that certainly that's a case of right there of, and I'm sure there's so many stories in terms of people that their lives have totally changed in that sense of not having access to abortion in whatever form, and that we certainly don't want to see that here in Minnesota or in other states. So, yeah.
Thanks, Alicia. Any other questions for Grace?
Thank you so much, Grace. This is a wonderful presentation, and thank you for being open to suggestions and feedback as well. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well. Really enjoyed being here and hearing what you guys thought about the value statements.
If you think of any more, let us know.
Yes, absolutely. They're still a work in progress, so we'll take anything you got.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'm going to wrap up the meeting. I just want to thank Grace a lot for coming today. She has been just a champion on trying to address how do we, like she said at the beginning of her presentation, how do we bring this conversation out into the open? Because the number one reason why we're seeing this backlash against the right to make choices over your own body, the number one reason we're seeing this is because people are not talking about it, are not sharing what's really going on. And there's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think, there's these women, I've seen movies where women are like, oh, that's my contraception, which isn't what it's not the case, so there's these false ideas about why abortion is important in our communities. And unless we start talking about it and really understanding the role it plays, we've known throughout history, it's been an important issue for women. You know, in every country across the world, it's an important issue. And in countries where it's banned, people have to go to extremes to find alternatives. And so we need to have open conversations about that again. So it's more we're not just hearing this rhetoric of it's you know, it's a negative thing. We're hearing how it really helps women and makes for healthier societies. Chris, were you going to say something?
Well, just that it also, you know, begs that comprehensive sex education and access to contraception. So it's an all of the above. There's the same people that fight against education and fight against contraception are anti-abortion. You know, we want to keep people, you know, what was that old saying? Barefoot pregnant in the kitchen and stupid. You know, that we don't want, you know, there's definitely a group of people that do not want women to be in charge of their own destinies. And you know, what for a myriad of reasons, I'm sure, but you know, we definitely need to have all of those things be part of the conversation.
Amen, Chris.
Yeah. I think
Okay.
Chris makes a good point. I think that a woman's right to make choices for her body, there are so many other things that women have had to fight over centuries to be considered equal to our male counterparts. I mean, if it was voting, if it was, I mean, it just goes on and on and on with this whole, you know, patriarchy that we've tried to fight through. And I don't see many of the voices against women's rights being truly concerned with the life of a child, but more concerned with the fact that they feel that they're giving up, you know, control.
Bingo, that's it.
One of my favorite bumper stickers back in the 1980s, and it's still relevant today, was Republicans, and this was a very political one. Republicans believe life begins at conception and ends at birth. You know.
I want that sticker.
Yeah.
It's still so relevant, isn't it?
It is. It's sad.
We found that a lot as a teacher back in I can't remember, it was the 70s or 80s with the readiness and Head Start programs where they were fought against, and actually a lot of times like the readiness program was taken away. And you're right, Renee, because they're so concerned about the baby being born, but once it's here, how to take care of it. And that's where I was always upset, because being a teacher too, with our kids needing the help when they were very young, because they said, you know, by 3 or 4, they've really already started to have developed what they are going to be like as they go into the future. And losing those programs was a big deal, especially with readiness and Head Start.
Yeah.
And it's a political thing too, and that's with Reagan, how they said, oh, he was so wonderful, but I will never forgive him for taking those programs away. He was the president in charge then.
He was my all-time most disliked president ever.
Yeah. Well, you know, we can get on, but anyway, it's getting late here. But yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We could go into whole conversations around that. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. Any final thoughts to Grace before we go?
Thank you, Grace.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Grace and Alicia.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
Grace.
thank you.
I'll find that list too somewhere.
Awesome.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for
Good
coming.
night. Thank you, Grace.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Good night, and thank you for hosting.
Thanks for
You're
you.
welcome.
Yep.
Night.
Good night. Oh.